You good, Sam?
Good.
This is Howie Hodges interview, take one.
And mark it. Okay, great. Let's give him a second.
Settle down?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Howie, thanks for doing this.
Morning, Sam.
Really appreciate it.
Morning.
So, Howie, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into the Maynard questions. Where
Sure.
are you from?
I'm from Buffalo, New York, actually a suburb from Buffalo, New York. Grew up in a family of two, a brother who's a year younger, mom and dad, fabulous family, and extended cousins in Western New York. My dad is from Mississippi, and he went to Morehouse, and after Morehouse, moved to New York, actually upstate New York, where he got his graduate degree, and that's where he and my mom met.
When and where did you first meet Beth Jackson?
Oh, it's like yesterday when I met Beth. I met her through a mutual friend. It's my best friend. His name is Greg Griffin. And he invited me over to his apartment in Bethel Towers, right on Sweet Auburn Avenue, to have dinner. And all he cooked, Sam, was chicken. So he had fried chicken, and Beth came in with her girlfriend, actually who was their neighbor down the street, Melinda. And that's when I met Beth.
And how long were you involved with Beth before you decided you wanted to get married?
It started, Beth and our relationship started first as friends. We were good friends for a while. I was in a relationship, and so was she. Her boyfriend, maybe fiance at the time, was here in Washington, D.C., in the law school. And so when we met in Greg's little small cramped apartment in Bethel Towers, we struck up a good friendship there. She was gorgeous to begin with. But in terms of getting together with her, it was actually a little months later after that.
Now, I asked her, and you told me a long time ago about the first time you went to meet Maynard to ask him for a hand in marriage. She told me she told you to prep. Tell me what she told you to do. She told you to prep to meet her dad.
Oh, to meet her dad? To meet her dad, this was probably, I was a sophomore at Morehouse, and we were just really getting into our relationship. And she said, I'm going to take you down to City Hall to meet my dad. Now, and it was like an instruction manual. I want you to wear a suit. I want you to have a crisp shirt. I want you to make certain that you've read every newspaper that day. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the USA Today. I want you to read the Wall Street Journal because we're not sure what he's going to ask you, and I want to make certain that you're well prepared for that meeting.
And what did Maynard Jackson ask you when you first walked in the room? And what was your impression? Let me take it back.
Sure.
Now, you knew who Maynard Jackson was.
Sure.
What was your impression of Maynard Jackson before you started dating his daughter?
The impression that I had of Maynard was just that this was this larger-than-life figure, particularly for a Morehouse man, in that he was a young student, had gone on in political science to do really great things as a mayor. And so we saw him. We saw him on campus. He came to chapel and spoke. We had chapel every Wednesday. And so we saw notable figures like that. But meeting him in person, and particularly in a family matter, it was kind of eerie. And in fact, so you walk up to City Hall, everyone knows Beth, from the security guard at the front gate all the way to the elevator, to Faye First, who was his executive assistant. And then you walk into this very large chamber, and he's standing behind the desk, this larger-than-life man with hands the size of a baseball glove. And he says, "Nice to meet you. My name is Maynard Jackson." I know who you are, but he was just, he always wanted to kind of put you at ease.
And so,
Wait a second. Noel, move to your right. Keep going. Are you moving to your right or to your left? Move the other way. Move the other way. Move the other way. There you go. Okay, thank you. I was just seeing your reflection in that, even though it's out of focus. Every time you move. All right, Sam, move.
so what was the first thing he said to you? He asked you.
He asked me what was my major in college. He said, well, where are you from? What's your major? What do you plan to do? And I said, I'm Howie Hodges. I'm from Buffalo, New York. I'm a political science major, English minor, and I want to be a lawyer. And that, we kind of locked in after that because I knew he was political science. And so we had that in common.
What questions did he ask you, Howie?
He asked me about the subjects I was taking. I had taken the same, one of my favorite professors, Dr. Robert Brisbane, was the head of the political science department, and he was one of Maynard's instructors as well. So we talked about Dr. Brisbane's courses and did I like him as a professor? You know, what were my grades? He was very concerned about how I was doing academically. I said, I'm a sophomore. I did okay as my freshman year, but I think I'm going to be doing better this year.
So how long after that did you ask him about marrying his daughter?
It was 6 years. We dated for 6 years, Sam, before I asked Maynard for Beth's hand in marriage. And so it was from my sophomore year through college until my first semester of first year in law school when I went to ask him for her hand.
And what did he ask you? What did he say to you then? What was his question?
Sam, going to ask the man, the dad, the father, the question to marry his oldest daughter was another very serious day in terms of preparation. I was in the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. I was in my first semester, and again, Beth appealed to me again, make certain that you are prepared. This is going to be a very interesting day. And so I flew from Pittsburgh to Atlanta. I made an appointment with his assistant, Faye First. He was a law partner at the time at Chapman and Cutler, but he had an Atlanta office on Grant Street. I'm trying to remember what floor the building was, but it's a gorgeous building, and it was a meeting. It was a formal appointment on his calendar. I remember arriving there early, checking my fingernails to make certain that there was no dirt underneath them, because he was very particular about just not only how you look, but your complete comportment. And so when we sat down, he said, well, have you asked her mother? And I said, yes, I have. And what was her answer? I said, she agreed with it, sir. He said, so have you and Beth thought about this? I said, well, we've been dating for a while. You've seen us together, and we're very serious. I love your daughter. I want to marry her. Then he asked the question, when do you want to get married? And I said, well, sir, I think we want to do it after I graduated from law school. And he said, good answer, good answer. I was kind of taken aback by that, but then he asked, have you talked about having a family? And I said, we've talked about having a family. And, you know, we are both keeping an open idea about it, but we don't feel the urge, or neither feels really compelled to have children. He said, okay, fair answer. And he said, and what religion, what church will you go to? He was very concerned about our religious studies. And I said, well, we both, you know, pray to God. We both are very serious spiritually. He said, well, make certain that you two are harmonious on the way you practice and you serve God. Then he asked all kind of questions about where we were going to live. I said, I'm still in school. I haven't finished school yet. I said, but we'd like to, I think we want to settle into Atlanta after I graduated from law school. And he said, okay. But it was probably the meeting lasted over an hour, but we went through all kinds of questions.
And you already known him for 6 years, right?
I knew him well. I definitely knew him well.
So how did the relationship with Maynard evolve after you and Beth were married? As Beth says that you guys would have more conversations, she felt that you were closer to him than she was after they were married. Wait a second, he's just adjusting the mic.
My relation.
Hold a second. You can settle.
My relationship with Maynard actually, when we got Maynard was close. He called me in the mornings about 7 o'clock on his ride to the city. And all he wanted to know was, how was his daughter? Is she happy? Are you happy? And it was often that we talked about just her. So the interesting thing was like, he's like, look, how are you doing on your job? Are you providing for her? I said, well, I think she's eating well. I think she's dressing well. And so we had an interesting rapport, and it was often, Sam, he called me the early years of our marriage just about every other morning, 7 o'clock. Good morning, Howie. This is Maynard. And you knew the voice of God was on the ear, on the other end of the phone. And when we first married, we were in Atlanta, and we lived in her mom's house. Her mom said, look, getting started is gonna be tough for you guys. I was, at the time, right out of law school, and I went to work in banking. I was in the management training program for the First National Bank of Atlanta, now it's Wachovia. And so it was a good salary, and Beth was working at the tax department, so we both had good incomes, but we were saving because we wanted to, maybe buy a house or maybe move. And so Mom said, just stay at the house. And so he knew where we were, but early on it was always fun. Beth and I's joke, who was that, Daddy? Did he call you? What did he say? I said, he asked how you were, and were you happy?
You guys are Morehouse men, you're both alpha guys.
Yes, we are.
So, did you talk about things other than Beth all the time? What else did you talk about?
We talked about politics. We talked about the city that he loved so much. We talked about family. He was very much a family man. We talked about his siblings. We talked about, because my father, while at Morehouse in the early 50s, knew his older sister. And so that was another good connection that we had in terms of kind of easing that transition, because first he was like, who is this man from Buffalo, New York, that's got an interest in my oldest daughter? So, but we talked about a range of things, but our common landing point was politics. And then from there, it was family. But we talked about the challenge that he had as mayor, his passion for the city, how he was really concerned. And again, when we were married, he was not in politics, but he still was active in terms of shaping who ran for office. He was also kind of consulted very frequently by councilmen, by state senators, state representatives. He was counsel to a number of elected officials. So he would basically relay to me some of those conversations that he had with various politicians.
This is before he did his third term, huh?
This is before he did his third term.
So I've been asking everyone, was he, I know he was a public servant, but did he talk to you about wanting to do this third term as mayor? What was your reaction to him wanting to go for a third term as mayor? Do you think it was a good idea? Was it a bad idea?
I was mixed. In terms of his idea, in terms of when Maynard decided to run for a third term in office, I had very mixed opinions about it, because I knew the tremendous, I could see, I was a witness firsthand to see the terrible pressure that it put on him, the time that it took him away from family, the time that just the weight of the responsibility of the office weighed on him. And so when he and I talked, he said, I think I'm going to run for mayor again. I said, and how did you reach that decision? He said, well, I thought about it carefully. I'm really enjoying my work in the law, but I can best serve by being mayor. I can best serve the citizens of Atlanta if I came. And I don't, I see the direction that the city can go in and go even, climb even higher. And so I was mixed about it. But then after that, I said, whatever you need us to do, we will be there for you. And by that time, Beth and I had moved from Atlanta. We moved in '87 to Washington, actually the Washington, D.C., Northern Virginia area. And so we were up in this area here in Northern Virginia, D.C., and we went back and forth volunteering on the campaign. And I remember Beth basically taking some time off, and she left her job here to just go work on the campaign almost full time.
Because it was interesting, you were sitting here, we were talking to Tally yesterday.
Yes.
And it was Maynard, he was saying Maynard's making a lot of money, when he's with Chapman, and now he's gonna go back and be mayor, and he's got, Jesus, man, the guy's got 3 kids from the first marriage, and he's got the new family. I mean, I don't know why, he really must have loved that city.
He loved it, and you talked about just the range of emotions and decisions that went into running for that third term. There were so many factors that he had to kind of weigh. Leaving Chapman and Cutler from a financial standpoint was very different. It was.
Hold on. Come on in, please. Keep rolling.
Yeah.
Hold a second. Let him settle.
So when you're ready, D.
Okay.
Can't sit there.
No, because I see a reflection, so.
You see the reflection.
Just,
Sit on the floor or something, Mo.
Guys ready?
Yep.
Good, huh?
The decisions that went into running for mayor the third time were very complex. From a financial standpoint, he took his income not in half, but more than half. I mean, from over 300,000, maybe 400,000 with bonus, to maybe 100, maybe. With 2 families, support for the first set of children, other than, Beth was out. Brooke was still in school, Buzzy was still in school, and then, Valerie, Amanda, and Alex were still in school. It was a lot to think about. And so basically what he was doing with the money that he had earned from Chapman and Cutler, he was financing that's why he could, I think, financially do it for 4 years. Because the savings that he had to rely on his savings to basically get him through those 4 years. So people don't really see or understand the level of sacrifice, not just emotional and the physical drain that it takes on you, but also the financial commitment that it was involved. Because he also looked after and helped other members of the family. He had other nieces and nephews from his sisters that he helped. I mean, he was the big papa. He was the big papa for the entire family.
It had to take a toll on him. I know physically.
Physically, yes.
He had to bypass those things where his health wasn't great, right?
Health was not good. His health was not good. He always, the contradictions that he had was, well, Howie, I'm going to get a physical trainer. I'm going to get a workout. I'm like, great, okay. It's like, I heard that before. I'm going to work out. I'm going to get better. I'm going to take better care of myself. I got a treadmill at the house, or a little, one of those like bicycles. And then I remember we got a personal trainer, and she was very famous and a great trainer, but he never followed up. And then, he was always like kind of like seesawing back and forth.
He talked about his children, particularly Buzzy. I know Buzzy was his son, and
Yes.
Buzzy was going through changes. I asked your wife about it, but I don't think I got much. What about you? Did he talk about
Did he talk about the children? Yes, he did.
What did he say?
He was concerned about all of them. He wanted his children to have the best life possible. He wanted to give them exposure to education, exposure to the arts. He was very much into the arts, exposure to culture. He wanted and he didn't believe that everybody had to follow in his footsteps to be a politician, but he wanted the best for each one, but he was hard as a dad. This man was exacting. He had exceptionally high standards for himself, and he applied that to each and every one of his children. And, you know, from the outside in, or part of that family perspective, he was hard on his siblings. He would tell them, no, you're not in the right job. You need to do this, to do this, do this. And for, I'd say for Buzz in particular, he expected him to almost, you know, carrying that name. I think that was a blessing as well as a burden, not a curse, but a burden, a heavy burden to bear, to be the third after his father and after his grandfather, all legacies, expecting the third to basically either be like him or like his grandfather, but never early on, or at least I never saw him allowing Buzz to be himself. Even to, I want you to go to this school because this is where Senator so-and-so's son is. I want you to go to this program because this is where so-and-so is, and you'll get the network. And that wasn't what Buzz wanted. And he always found a way out of those situations to just make certain that, you know, Maynard III was Maynard III. He was his own man, always. I've known him. And the other part, too, is that I've known Brooke since she was, 11? Maynard III since he was 8.
So you've seen them evolve, and you've seen the relationship they have with their father.
I've seen the relationship, and I've seen the strain.
Right. What do you mean by the strain?
The strain in terms of just, he was a hard man to please. And Brooke, I think, you know, managed to kind of navigate. Beth was never a pleaser. She always did her own thing, was always very independent. And so at a time, particularly during the college era, when Beth left Spelman to go to Georgia State, that was a big riff that, fracture that kind of occurred because all of his aunts had gone to Spelman. His mother had gone to Spelman. This was his oldest child. She was expected to go to Spelman. So again, expecting, demanding. And so that was I'd say that tug of war between Maynard and the kids.
I was asking, you know, you've seen a lot. I was asking, and you heard Tally talk about, you know, him being a family man, but also having this tremendous responsibility as the mayor.
Yes.
You know, I mean, it must have been very difficult to be a family man and a family man with two families, and also being the mayor of the city. What did you see?
As a family man, he had a lot to juggle. He was in constant demand work, and then he had first family from first marriage and second family. And they were on opposite sides of the city, Southwest Atlanta, and originally in kind of like the off of Cascade Road, and then later the family moved into the Buckhead area. And so when I saw him, I mean, I was always at the house. I was always at 1272 Oakcrest with Beth in the yard playing basketball, and I'd see that black Lincoln town car pull up, and he'd pop out the front seat with his bodyguard, and he was calling on either Brooke or Buzzy to see them or to take them somewhere. Beth and I were doing our own thing. We were grown, and so that was an interesting scene to just watch him have to spend his time shuttling literally between, both families.
Always tough.
Yes.
Always tough. As a man who's gone through that myself.
Mhm.
Very difficult. The day before that fateful day in D.C.,
Mhm.
did you have a conversation with Maynard? And what was the conversation?
The day before the fateful day, our conversation was positive. Our conversation was really optimistic. We were looking to the future because we were planning for a major expansion in Jackmont hospitality. I was at the time working full-time as a financial and business consultant, and
Tell us what Jackman Hospitality was before you go into that.
Sure. Jackmont Hospitality was a institutional food service company that Maynard, Brooke, and Dan Halpern created in 91 or 92. And it was a full service company that provided institutional dining to places like hospitals, colleges. It did some work at the time with the IRS Service Center, I remember, in Cincinnati. And I had been working for months and months to broker and carve out a strategic partnership with Sodexo. Sodexo is one of the largest institutional food service companies in a partnership with Jackmont Hospitality. I had helped to architect that deal with a colleague of mine who worked at Sodexo. She and I worked in the Clinton administration together, Ruth Sandoval. She was vice president for strategic partnerships. And so that day before, we were working through the details of the schedule for that Monday. And that Monday, which was the 23rd of June, 03, we were going to have a meeting with the president and chief executive officer for Sodexo United States of America to sign a strategic partnership where Jackmont and Sodexo would work together to provide food for the entire Atlanta school system, as well as for colleges and universities and hospitals.
And what was the plan?
The plan was that Jackmont was going to be their minority partner in a either 60-40 partnership to go out. Or they won part of the original partnership was to provide food service for the entire Atlanta public school system. That was the very first contract that came about out of that partnership that I helped to negotiate and broker on behalf of Jackmont Hospitality. The second phase was to go in and to do work in hospitals and then HBCUs, historically black colleges and universities. So Sodexo and Jackmont Hospitality were going to go into communities and provide food service to other HBCUs.
So that early morning, Maynard must have gotten up, had to get up early, like 5 in the morning to get that plane. So tell us about that day and what you were supposed to do. You were supposed to meet Maynard?
That day, June the 23rd, I haven't talked about it much, but June the 23rd was a Monday morning. Beautiful day, beautiful, warm June, summery Monday. It was going to be a very full day. And so where Beth and I lived in Falls Church, Virginia, I hopped on the metro, and I was hopping on the metro early, probably about 7:15, in order to get to the airport to be in time to meet him as he was getting off the shuttle. I think it was like a 8:15, 8:35 shuttle that the plane landed. And we were supposed to have gone to 2 stops. The first stop was to the AFL-CIO, where he was raising money for the Atlanta Voters League. That was supposed to have been a couple-hour meeting. And then we had a limousine or town car that was to take us all the way out to Gaithersburg, Maryland, to have this luncheon and this historic meeting and signing of this partnership, this monumental partnership between Sodexo, USA, and Jackmont Hospitality. And so when I got to the airport, I got there a little late, and I was trying to figure out, had he come through security? yet. And so I had my cell phone in my hand, I had my briefcase, I was suited up, and I was on the South Pier of National Airport. And I didn't see him, so I walked down the baggage claim thinking that he had gone down there because that's where you would normally meet outside a baggage claim for your limousines or for your sedan service. I didn't see him there, but I saw an ambulance. I said, okay, that's odd. You know, it's about 8:40. And then as I take the escalator and I get up to the main pier of National Airport, I get a phone call from Pat Allen. And she said, Howie, where are you? So I'm at the airport. She says, something's terrible has happened. Maynard has collapsed. And they're getting ready to take him by ambulance to the hospital. Are you there? I said, I think I saw the ambulance. And Pat said, Howie, I don't think it looks good. I said, why do you know that? She said, well, they had to resuscitate him outside of before he even got out of the gate. She said, I know that because one of the Delta service managers is with him. He has his folio and he's talking to me in real time. She said, well, you know, Dan Halpern, his partner from Jackmont Hospitality, his flight is not even 10 minutes behind Maynard's. And I said, no, I haven't been able to get in contact with him. I said, obviously, because he's in the air. I said, let me wait for Daniel, and Daniel and I will rush over to the hospital. The next call, the first call I made was to Beth. It was about 8:55. And I said, baby, Daddy's had a heart attack. He just got off the plane. And they're taking him to the hospital. And I said, I don't want you to drive by yourself. Go next door to our neighbors and just have them take you to the hospital. Have them drive you to the hospital. And she says, no, I'll be okay, baby, I'll be okay. Where we lived in Falls Church, Virginia was less than 2 miles from the hospital they were taking him. And so my phone is just ringing. Pat, where are you? I said, I'm still in the airport. I'm waiting. Dan's flight's just landed. I'm calling Daniel. And then I'm also talking to folks from Delta. They had found, you know, through Pat and other friends. But the first call I made was to Beth. And then when I saw Daniel in the airport, he came running toward me, told him where we were. And then he and I immediately went down the escalator. He had a little small bag, and we hopped in a taxi, and we rode from National Airport, which is in Arlington, Virginia, to the Northern Virginia Hospital over on George Mason Boulevard. And on the route, we were just back and forth. And we looked at each other. We sat in this modest cab and we looked at each other. And he said, Howie, this is going to be rough. This is going to be rough. I said, but we've got each other. And I said, we've got to step up and get through this together. It didn't take us but about not even 10 minutes to get to the emergency room. Again, a gorgeous day. Gorgeous day. The sun was shining, warm. We jump out of the taxi, and we're right there going through those automatic doors in the emergency wing. And we run in, and I can see Beth. They had moved her. I said, where's my wife? They said, we put her in a private room. When I went to the private room, she was holding her father's clothes. They had been cut off of him. She was holding his big shoes. She was holding a bag of all of his possessions that he had on him, his notepad. And I hugged her. And then young gentleman was there from the Atlanta Voters League. He came as well because he was also supposed to have met Maynard. So it was Dan, Beth, young gentleman from the Atlanta Voters League. We had a charge nurse that they had given us in that room to just be with us. And the phones were ringing. Our phones were ringing. And so Daniel and I were in touch with Valerie. I had difficulty calling her at first because the number that I had was just maybe this is the general house number, and it was just ringing busy. Then I called Pat and I said, Pat, I'm here at the hospital and I need to talk to Valerie. She said, Valerie wants to know what's going on. And so I finally got through to Valerie. And this is before they had pronounced it. I said, I'm here, we're here, we'll let you know. She says, call me as soon as you know what's going on. But everyone's calling, so the hospital sends their public relations manager down. The service manager from Delta Airlines came. We had a lot of help from the hospital. Virginia Medical Center was absolutely fabulous. They were absolutely fabulous. They kept us in this room. And then I was looking through my folder. I have the folder over here of everybody that I talked to that morning. I have it over here. And the doctor's name was Dr. Winnie Fong. And she came in, and when she told us the news that he had expired, Beth just let out a shriek that I never heard her scream like that. Never. It was just like everything in her came out. It was powerful. And one of the black nurses there just put her arms around her and just rocked her. Oh, rocked her until she got quieter. Daniel, his face just changed complexion. He just, all the blood out of his face just went out. All of his, he just, And I just stood there for a while, just numb from the shock of it. And then I went over and I hugged Beth. And we hugged and we rocked for a long time. And then I went outside. Daniel and I went outside. And we started to make the calls. There was a island just outside of the emergency area, the emergency where cars would pull up. And so we stood out there on that island. And I remember reaching into my briefcase and grabbing a notepad and grabbing my cell phone and then just started making calls. I called my best friend Greg, but then I went back and I called my brother, Kevin. My father died in '97. I called my mother, and I called Bunny. I called my other mom, Bunny. And I couldn't find her. She was traveling, so I could not reach her. But calls. We were just making calls, letting people know. Daniel called Tally. Then I said, oh, I need to call Aunt Matawilda. She's nearby. I need to call Paul. He's nearby. Pat calls again. I said, I said, he didn't make it. I called Valerie again. And Valerie was just very, by this time she says, what should I do? What do you think I should be doing at this moment? Where should I go? And I said, he's here. The nurse tells us and the doctors tell us that he's a donor, organ donor. And so there are going to be organs that need to be harvested before he gets transported. I said, maybe you and the girls should come here and then go back. She says, I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know if I want to do that. She says, call me back. So that's how that, then when I called her back and I said, well, it's going to take a little while longer for these organs to be harvested that it may be a little later on this afternoon, she says, bring my husband home. Bring him home. Howie, bring him home. I'll never forget that. I said, I will bring your husband home. We got very good support that day. Brooke was in town. She came to the emergency room. She came maybe, in terms of the time frame, it was maybe about 35, 40 minutes, maybe not even an hour after he had expired. And she was bringing a little baby. She was in town. And so I hugged Brooke. Daniel and I met Brooke. We saw her when she got out of the car with her girlfriend, Lisa. And so I hugged Brooke, hugged the baby. And then I took Brooke back. By that time, Beth was in the room. Beth stayed just about by her father's side for that whole morning. They had prepared his body. They had cleaned him. He just looked like he was sleeping. This big giant of a man in a dimly lit room, hospital room, on a single bed. And Beth was sitting in the chair next to him, stroking his hand. And he was there, just a sheet covering him just to maybe about his upper chest. And so I took Brooke in to see him, and it was very, very, very tough, very, very emotional for Brooke to see that. And then I went back outside because I was also waiting as I had made contact and was able to contact Paul. And I said, Paul, Maynard's at the hospital. There's an emergency here, and you need to come. And so Paul came with a girlfriend, and when he came, I did not tell him that his brother had passed. I had assumed at the time that he had heard, because this was maybe almost going into the hour 2 when he arrived, that based on the news coverage, because they had a CNN truck just beyond reach, they had asked Daniel and said, would the family here like to make any statements? And we said, no, we did not want to make any statements. I did not want to be presumptuous to speak on behalf of the family. I wanted, Valerie and to just be able to figure that out, what she wanted to do back in Atlanta. So Daniel and I, we refused all opportunities to give any statements or say anything to the media here in Virginia. But we had ABC News, NBC News, CNN had all come because they'd heard, it had been on the television, it had been reported that morning. And so when Paul came, I assumed that he knew what had happened to his brother. And so we embraced, he embraced with Daniel, and then I walked him back into the room. And I will never forget that he almost fell, almost lost his footing after he saw his brother there, because it just hit him just everywhere. You could just see him, his knees shook. He started to just, and he just, oh my God, Maynard. And we all hugged him because that was the first moment that he knew that he lost his brother. The first moment that he knew that his big brother had passed. The day sped up and slowed down, like you could just hear the seconds tick on the clock. Everything was just it seemed to come to me in slow motion. I remember Daniel calling to Representative Harold Ford, very good friend of Dan's, very good friend of the family. And Representative Ford was phenomenal in that the Ford family helped to make the funeral arrangements or the embalming arrangements with McGuire's funeral home here in Washington, D.C. And so Daniel says, hey, Harold's got that covered. I think we're going to be okay there. So Daniel and I were just calling. I'm talking to family. Daniel's talking to Harold, talking about when do we think that the body's going to be ready to be moved from Virginia to D.C. Mayor Anthony Williams reached out to us, called, say, if there's anything I can do to be helpful, let me know. We had calls from everywhere, people who were just offering to be helpful. And then the other thing that I said, oh, well, what about all these meetings that we're supposed to have today? That was one of the other thoughts. But Ruth Sandoval, she lived not too far from the hospital. She was the vice president at the time for strategic partnerships at Sodexo. She came to the hospital. She met me out on that pad, and she said, if there's anything I can do to be helpful, let me know. And we said, obviously this meeting's not going to happen. And so she said, we'll get food to the house. Don't worry, we'll take care of it. But there were a lot of just helpful people that day, but just time just moved slowly.
And then you had a plane coming from Coca-Cola.
That afternoon, once we found out that it was going to be a little while for his organs that were being harvested for the donation, they're saying, well, what is going to be the size of the transport case for him? He's a big guy. So you don't think of those things. And so, Beth had gotten a call. We had gotten a call while we were there that Coca-Cola was saying, whatever we can do to help. It was Ingrid Saunders Jones. Never forget. She reached out and said, what can we do to be helpful? She was en route from, I think, Atlanta to New York on some trip. She says, I can come this afternoon. We can bring, I'm in the company jet. We'll be honored to help you in any way we can. And we'd like to offer to take Maynard back on behalf of Coca-Cola back to Atlanta. And then I think after the pilots and I didn't know the details, talked with the people inside the hospital and the funeral home around the size and the dimensions of that case and the weight. It was decided that we would go back the next day and make another arrangements, and that's when Tally and others, and then even Delta reached out to us to offer to transport him back.
And his legacy. How?
Maynard's legacy is also like him. It's very complex. It is a man who was bold, and he was never afraid to stand up to power. He had an expression where he talked about other black politicians in particular. He called it, scared Negro disease, of those who would not speak truth to power, or who would not, once in power, do everything ethical to help their people. And so he was about economic opportunity. He was about the arts and culture. But I think his biggest legacy, at least as I see it, is in what he did to create a whole culture of black entrepreneurs. He created and helped to create a whole class of black middle class, upper class, and many black millionaires. The other thing, and I say that, is why that day was so important. Maynard was under a lot of, I'm going backwards a little bit, Sam, on you, is that the stress of managing, he had about 10 different business interests going at the time. Some of them were in different phases of maturation. Some were more mature, some were just startups. But he bore the weight of financing and keeping hundreds of people employed. He personally guaranteed loans on these businesses. His name, his assets were at risk. And so, he had a heavy burden to bear. And I think the weight of carrying his businesses, not wanting to disappoint his business partners, and the hundreds of people that he employed, and the families that they represented, was something that was gnawing at him. In addition to the Sodexo deal, the other deal that was pending was he and Magic Johnson, Maynard, MJ, and MJ were coming together to own and operate a series of TGI Fridays from coast to coast. It was going to be the urban-focused, Fridays. And it was Magic and Maynard, MJ and MJ. That too was also in the works. And it was something that he was working on up until the day he passed away. And so his legacy in terms of business and entrepreneurship, his legacy in terms of being an ethical, straight-shooting politician who was never afraid to speak truth to power, his legacy of opening up supplier development for women and minority businesses is still talked about to this day. And so every time, I travel through, and I travel an awful lot, I think you and I see each other through airports. Every time I pass through that airport, it's hard. His name is on the airport. And I know what he put into getting that airport up. One of the first official dates that Beth and I took was when the airport had its dedication. I rode in the limousine with Valerie, who was pregnant with Valerie and Amanda. Beth and I were in college. And he let us ride with him to the opening of the airport. So to see him come back through an airport when he passed. And then when we took him home the next day, that June 24th, 2003, it was so fitting for the airport to open its arms so wide as he landed on a Delta airline jet. It was either Terminal A or B, and all the airport employees were on the tarmac. All the ramp people were on the tarmac. All the tug drivers stopped. You could see the cameras through the window at the gate when that plane pulled in, that Delta plane pulled in. And the pilot said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to stay seated for a while because this crew, we've had the privilege and the honor to bring the first African-American Mayor Maynard Jackson back home to his resting place. He is on this jet. And we want to give time for his family to get him off this jet." And then as we look down, I'm sitting next to an air marshal. Tally and Dan are next to me. We're in the first section of the plane. The pilot gets out of the cabin. He shakes our hand. So as we're deplaning in Atlanta on June 24th with Maynard's body on the plane, the pilot, the co-pilot, the first attendant, all of the stewardess shake our hand. And we walk out the side ramp of the rampway, and we walk down the steps. And I'll never forget standing at the foot of the plane as the limousines pulled up, the family limousines pulled up. And that's all you saw, limousine, limousine, limousine. And you saw the police cars, the fire trucks. You see Atlanta, big and small. And the family got on either side of the tug that had the conveyor belt where his casket was removed from the cargo area of the plane with a flag attached to it. And we stood on either side and watched him come home. That's the legacy. That's the legacy.
Okay.
Can I get a slate real quick?
Slate.
Yeah. Hold on one second, hold on one
Is this
second.
a tail slate?
It is a tail slate, yes.
Okay, flip it over. Flip the slate upside down.
Push it in some more. Okay, and
Tail slate, take one.
mark it, and then put it right side up. There you go. Thank you.
Cool.
Because I drop frames.
Yeah.
Cutting, Kevin cutting.
That's great.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and call it. Open the state.
This is room tone?
Go ahead. Okay.
Okay.
Good. Okay.
Thank you.
Cutting.